All right, so the first dynamic is the availability trap, and this is one that plagues a lot of organizations, and it's because we oftentimes proxy our remote work setup on our in-office setup. In an office space, if you have a question, it's kind of fun and nice to walk over to a colleague's desk, ask that question, get the information and answer you need, and chit-chat and sort of catch up. So finding information in an offline environment can also be social and fun. Finding information in a remote environment is very different. So when you have a question, if you use a method like Slack to ping a colleague and say, hey, do you have access to this document, or do you know when this project is starting? What you do is, one, you break up their day, so all of a sudden they're being asked to turn their attention to an issue you have. Two, when colleagues aren't available, you're kind of stuck. Either you have to spend more time trying to find what you were looking for, or you have to wait until a colleague is online. And what that does is it starts to create an environment where the people that are available and present are rewarded. So being available, being helpful becomes part of your remote responsibilities. And over time, I'm sure you can see where this is going, that means it's really difficult for people to really log off and be offline because by doing that, they're not available for colleagues who may need them. So it means when people go off for vacation, when people are ill, it's really difficult for work to continue as normal. And in the availability trap, you kind of lead to two kinds of problems. The first is ones for you, which is you can feel stuck. So when you have that question, if you can't get an answer, you end up being stuck. The second is that you feel like you always have to be on. So if you're that little green dot in the chat, you're there, you're helpful, you're that colleague that's, always available to answer questions. And that then puts pressure on people to try and be that person, which isn't healthy in a remote space. The problem for your team is that availability becomes synonymous with impact. So being around becomes a part of your job as an employee, and that is not healthy, particularly in remote teams. And then conversation gets mistaken for real collaboration. So rather than structuring information so that people can find it and do their part of a project or a collaboration, and then come together meaningfully together to discuss when there's key conversations that you actually need to have to move a collaboration forward, you end up mistaking these Slack exchanges or these availability moments where someone has a question and someone gets that answer as a really impactful use of time when it's not. It basically implies that you don't have the underlying structures in place to be able to make information available when people need it, and instead they have to use social capital, social energy to find information that should have been available regardless. So that's sort of what it looks like when it's a problem. And the main step to improving this is, the first step is to become more intentional about asynchronous and synchronous ways of working. So a lot of times we use asynchronous work only when we can't connect live with a colleague. That's not good. Asynchronous collaboration requires a rethink of how we store information, how we make that information available, how we structure our projects. When we come together and meet, under what conditions is it worth that time and energy for people to be live, be present at the same time as their colleagues? And I would just encourage you, the first step is to just think meaningfully about when you look at your calendar, when you look at your synchronous time, that time you spend live with colleagues, is that actually the material that you should be covering, given how expensive that time is? And are there ways of considering sort of refactoring the way that you store and share information about projects and about your week that could make it easier for someone to access that information outside of a live conversation? So that's the first step. And I think the sort of thing that I'd like for you to do is to ask yourself, let's just say, hypothetically, if your team were not able to meet for 2 weeks, so I'm not talking about, let's have a call-free day. Imagine a longer period of time where you couldn't meet synchronously. It just wasn't possible. what would you do? What would you put in place to make it easier for people to move their work forward without access to their colleagues in a live form of communication? And I think by asking ourselves that question, we start imagining the way that we could structure asynchronous work to be a real driver of people being able to feel connected, but without having to be available all the time.